Again, thank you for joining us. This outreach lunch is really designed to provide people information about us, our work, our partners, our supporters, and the general public, so they understand how this important work can benefit them, their community, their values, and who we collaborate with to do that, and generally how we operate as an organization. So we hope you walk away with some excuse me, some good information, and we'll kick it off here in just a bit. I'll be kicking it off to Kara Kugritis, who'll be talking a little bit about how important this work is, and then Shannon Wattis will follow up a little bit more about our organization. So without further ado, I hope you guys are safe and sound and doing well. And hopefully we get to see you in person soon. So I'm going to kick it over to Kara. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to just turn off my camera, so goodbye to my face. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for coming, and happy Earth Day to you all. We have such a diverse crowd today, so we thought we would take a second to kind of give you some background into why we do what we do, give you a little context to our work. So I thought I would do that before I kick it over to Shannon, who's going to give you some more specific examples and talk more about our programs. So I love to start with this photo because for me it really hits home the value of these riparian areas. You know, it just shows this great contrast between life in the arid Southwest and the lush area that surrounds rivers. And for those of you who are not familiar, this is a riparian habitat, and riparian is just another word for riverside. It's just those two green strips of vegetation along either side of this river. And these riparian areas, we often refer to them as ribbons of life because of the incredible amount of plant diversity, and as a result, the amazing wildlife diversity that these places sustain. One of the interesting things I found was that only about 1% of land in the United States is really considered riparian habitat, yet up to 80% of wildlife will rely on these places, will rely on them for food or shelter at some point in their lifetime. So it's pretty wild. You know, almost all wildlife rely on these areas, yet we have such a small amount of it in the US. So to me, it is critically important that these ecosystems are healthy and have the diverse native plants that wildlife need. And when we talk about these riparian habitats, you know, what are we looking for? I wanted to show you a picture of kind of what we're after when we're restoring riparian habitats. This is our goal here. We are aiming to return these places back to the diverse and thriving ecosystems that they once were. And in this photo, you can see that there's multiple stories of vegetation in this riparian habitat. On the first level, we've got some grasses. On the second level, you have your shrubs, and on the third level, your larger mature trees. All of these areas are providing very specific types of habitat and food for wildlife. And the problem at hand is that invasive plants like tamarisk and Russian olive and many others, they've invaded these areas and they're outcompeting our native plants, drastically reducing the plant diversity and as a result, degrading wildlife habitat. So I always kind of liken it to going from a buffet of food to choose from to having to eat saltine crackers for the rest of your life. So I'll show you a couple more examples. And this next photo was taken in Neon Canyon along the Escalante River, if any of you have been there. And you can notice in this photo too that we have 3 levels of riparian vegetation. We've got some grasses in the front, shrubs behind that, and then some large trees way in the back there. And the next photo, this is pretty cool that I'm going to show you. You can look here to use this big old rock as your photo point. The next photo will demonstrate what it looks like when an invasive plant moves into the ecosystem. In this case, it's going to be Russian olive. So here's our before photo. And then when Russian olive invades, look at that landscape scale change. There's such a drastic difference. We have only 1 layer of plants now in this dense thicket blanketing the riverside, no access to the waterfront, providing very little food value to our wildlife. And you know, when tamarisk invades, it looks pretty similar. So here is what tamarisk looks like, very similar, as I said, no plant diversity, Just really think these photos do a good job of demonstrating that impact. So just to cover, we've covered this already, but invasive plants, they obviously decrease plant and wildlife diversity. But one other thing that they do is they also invade farms and ranches, and they reduce the value and productivity of land. And due to their dense thickets, it also really impacts recreation and the communities that live along these rivers. People can lose access to their riverfronts, and boaters can find that their former campsites and beaches have been invaded and overrun by these invasive plants. So a couple other things I wanted to cover, some interesting facts about these impacts of invasive plants. One is their water usage. Tamarisk consumes approximately about 20 gallons of water per day. That's actually about similar to how much water a cottonwood will consume, but these invasive plants, in comparison to our native plants, they grow in such sheer numbers that they do take up more water because there's so many more of them along our rivers. And they have these very large tap roots that allow them to survive up on the upper benches, the upper floodplain along our rivers, where normally you wouldn't have as densely packed vegetation. You'd have less water consuming species like sagebrush or rabbit brush. So these plants are taking up more water in that sense. And I have a really fun animation, thanks to NASA, to show you what I mean by that. So on the left here, you'll see we have a big old cottonwood tree with its root system. In the middle is our river. And then on the right is our tamarisk tree, and look at the roots in comparison. You can see that the roots are actually going down into this water table below and also underneath the stream. So what we're going to see happening through this little animation is that our tamarisk are going to start crowding in this riparian habitat, and these cottonwoods over here may not have the resources that they need to survive. So you kind of notice that this little guy over here no longer got the water that it needed. So that's kind of what we're looking at along rivers in terms of that water usage. Another example of their impact is that tamarisk specifically increases soil salinity. If you've ever heard of tamarisk being called salt cedar before, it is because tamarisk has a unique ability to make the topsoil even saltier. And the way that this works is another animation to show you. These are the roots of tamarisk here, and then you're going to see these little white dots that represent salt. And what the plant does is it takes up salt through its roots, and the salt gets distributed into its leaves. So now all of a sudden you have these very salty leaves, and when they fall in the fall time, those salty leaves begin to break down and decompose. And that salt then gets added to the top layer of soil here. So now we have these really salty soils. And as you might have guessed, tamarisk and Russian olive, they are very well adapted to survive in salty soils. And unfortunately, our native species like cottonwoods and willows, they are not accustomed to these salty soils, and it stresses them out if they have a harder time germinating. So just another way that these impacts from these invasive species are felt long after they are even removed. So the last thing I wanted to mention in terms of their impacts are the fact that they increase wildfire risk. So, with the formation of these dense thickets of invasive plants along our rivers, all of a sudden we have all of this extra fuel in our riparian corridors. And these dense thickets, they vastly blanket these areas, and they create a fuel ladder for wildfire to spread down the entire riparian corridor and beyond. This is a photo that was taken just outside of town here in Grand Junction on I-70. And you can see here that this area was really badly burned. And really what we're seeing is that these riparian zones are not adapted to fire, but tamarisk itself is much more flammable and ignites quicker, burns hotter than our native species. And these areas that were once barriers to fire are now becoming pathways for wildfire to spread. Fortunately, RiversEdge West is working with a lot of different partners to reduce and manage the spread of these invasive plants. So before I kick it over to Shannon, I'm going to discuss just 3 main ways that we can manage and control their spread. All 3 of these methods are used in concert with one another, but the first one that I'll go over is using mechanical removal. So we hire local contractors and youth conservation corps members who will get out there and remove these invasive plants. They, from chainsaws to heavy machinery like a hydro axe or an excavator, they'll be able to get some of those invasive plants out of there. In this photo over down in the bottom left, you can see it actually grabbed its taproot as well. But then there's a lot of times where they're using chainsaws and the roots are still left in place underground. So when that's the case, if the roots are left in place from this plant, it'll still resprout. So we will have them apply an herbicide. This blue chemical is applied to the living cambium layer of the tree on that tamarisk stump there, and it will sink down into the root system to kill the rest of the plant below ground. And then the third way that we help to manage tamarisk specifically is by using a biological control. When settlers brought tamarisk over from Asia in the 1800s, one of the things they didn't bring with it was one of tamarisk's natural predators that would help keep its population in check. So after massive amounts of research and testing, the USDA released the Tamarisk beetle in 2001 to help control the spread of this plant. So this little picture here is a nice size comparison for you. It is a specialist, so it only eats tamarisk. It doesn't eat anything else. And there's no plant similar to tamarisk in the United States so that it would jump host anything else. It's doing a really good job of doing exactly what it's intended to do. And at RiversEdge West, we monitor and educate about the spread of this tamarisk beetle. We don't release the beetle. The beetle does go through a full metamorphosis. You can see its larval form here, and then it'll reemerge as adults, as you can see in this picture. And as you might have guessed, they don't bite. So this gentleman doesn't really mind that they're crawling all over him. And in the next photo here, just to give you an idea of what this looks like at a landscape scale, you can see here's a photo of a monotypic stand of tamarisk along the Colorado River in Moab. So all just one plant, no plant diversity here. The tamarisk beetle will come in and defoliate the leaves of the tamarisk in mass. So in 1 month's time, it will leave the tamarisk looking like this. So it's a pretty impressive change. Now, you may think that this plant looks dead, but unfortunately, the tamarisk plant has plenty of energy stored up in its roots so that after it's been defoliated like this, it will leaf out again. But the beetle will continually come back and keep defoliating these plants. And over the course of about 3 to 5 years, it can eventually kill the tamarisk plant. And in some cases, if it doesn't kill the plant, at the very least, what it does do is that it eliminates tamarisk's ability to flower and spread more of its seeds. So really helping to minimize the spread of this plant. So essentially what we're looking at here, just to recap that, is we've got this tamarisk plant in the system. They've introduced the tamarisk beetle, a natural predator. It defoliates the leaves of the plant, and then the plant will leaf out once again using energy stored in its roots. But, and you can kind of see here in that bottom right photo, it doesn't leaf back with as much vigor. It has these little poodle puffs, or firework puffs as we call them. So it's really struggling here. And then the tamarisk beetle will come back more and more times to defoliate the plant. Eventually it can kill the plant. And it'll leave it looking like this. So in the bottom left photo, what we have here is a dead stand of tamarisk that has been repeatedly defoliated by the tamarisk beetle, and a lovely little native New Mexico privet is coming up through the understory. So this tamarisk beetle is just another method that is being used to control the spread of this plant. So I have so much more we could talk about, but I am gonna stop there. But if you do have questions, of course, enter them into the chat. And then also, we have a lot more information on our website. So I would encourage you to check it out. If you haven't followed us on Facebook and do all those things, there's a lot more that we can share. But for now, I'm going to kick it over to Shannon Wattis, our Associate Director, who's going to talk more about our programs and some of our efforts to restore these places.
Thanks, Kara. So as she said, I'm the Associate Director for RiversEdge West, and I'm just going to give you guys a pretty quick overview of our organizational structure and then the various programs that we work on. So our mission that Kara kind of briefly touched on already is we're really trying to advance the restoration of riparian lands, and we do this through kind of three main buckets that I like to group them into. So collaboration, education, and technical assistance. And really what we're working towards is trying to have a healthy network of riparian ecosystems all across the Southwest. So who are we? We are a small to medium nonprofit. Our 501c3 was officially established in 2002. Our home base is in Grand Junction, Colorado, where we have 7 staff located. This is kind of our stomping grounds. And then we also have 3 satellite staff that I'll talk about here shortly. And then we also have a board of directors that are pretty representative of the entire Southwest. So we're pretty lucky to have such a diverse group of people helping to represent our organization. So this is just a brief kind of chart of our program staff. So we have 4 restoration coordinators. John Leary is based out of our Grand Junction office. He helps to oversee the Southeast Utah area. There's a Southeast Utah Riparian Partnership that he is involved in. And then he also leads the White River Partnership. This is both in Utah and Colorado. This partnership is, we've been working on for a number of years, but we're actually getting closer to formalizing it with a MOU, and we're working towards a restoration plan, so that's very exciting for us. Mark Briggs is a remote staff. He's based out of Tucson, Arizona, and he helps to provide support for the Gila and the Verde rivers. Shelly Simmons is another remote staff. She's based out of Trinidad, Colorado, and she oversees the Purgatory. And then Rika Fulton is based out of our Grand Junction office, and she helps with different partnerships on the Colorado, the Dolores, and the Gunnison rivers. Ben Bloodworth is our Tamarisk Beetle program coordinator. I'll go into a little bit more detail about what he does in another slide. We also have a private lands biologist partner position with the NRCS. I'll go into this in a little more detail as well. This position is currently vacant, so we're looking to fill it in the near future. Kara, who you've heard from already, she's our outreach and education coordinator. And Kristen Jesperson is our funding program director. She is another remote staff, and she's based out of Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Okay, so I'm going to go into these 3 different aspects of our work that we do, the collaboration, education, and technical assistance. So first I'll talk about collaboration. So one of the really important pieces of our work is bringing diverse stakeholders together across a big geographic scope or across different jurisdictional boundaries. And as I mentioned earlier, we do lead several different partnerships. The Desert Rivers Collaborative, I have another slide on that, but that's based in Grand Junction, so that's the Colorado and the Gunnison rivers. The Dolores River Restoration Partnership, we co-lead that with Conservation Legacy and Southwest Conservation Corps. And then the White River Partnership, we also lead. And then the partnerships we support, there's lots of them, as you can see from this list. I won't go into all of them. They're spread across the West, and they're all very unique and different, and so we help with various different aspects of the partnerships, whether it's with fundraising or technical assistance or collaboration or structure, any of those things. We're very flexible and nimble, and so we can jump in any of those and help where needed. And then lastly, we also are involved in 2 various networks. We actually have another one on here that's not listed, but we have the Crest Watershed Network. This has been around for a number of years. It's basically a Southwest regional network that's really focused on peer-to-peer learning. So really drawing attention to the workshops that we do and the importance of learning from your peers. And then the Western Collaborative Conservation Network is a fairly new network. It's a 7-state Intermountain West network that's more broadly based. So it's all conservation groups or collaborative entities that are working on conservation. And so that's something that we participate in as well. And the other one I'll mention real briefly is the Arizona Cross Watershed Network. And this is was kind of born out of the Cross Watershed Network. It's a state-based initiative. It just gives you a geographic scope or kind of a visual of the various partnerships that we lead and support. So as you can see, we are all over the Southwest United States. And I did just want to briefly go into the Desert Rivers Collaborative in a little more detail. So this is where our roots started in 1999. So a group of people got together and decided that they should probably try to do something about the tamarisk that was really infesting the Colorado River through Grand Junction. And so that's where our organization started. This particular partnership we started in 2012. So it's 2 rivers, 2 counties. We have an MOU with over 20 signatories. And this really brings a diverse group of stakeholders together. So state agencies, federal agencies, private landowners, various NGOs, conservation districts, anyone who wants to be engaged in restoration work. And then just talking about our private lands biologist position. So this is a position that we started in 2018. And what we were really trying to do here was not only help so this is Natural Resources Conservation Service. This is a federal agency, and they provide federal assistance. Sorry about that, the challenges of working from home. So they really provide federal assistance for private landowners through various different programs. And so what we were really trying to do is bridge the gap between providing this information and into the hands of private landowners and really trying to piece together riparian restoration work on a landscape scale. And so this position has been extremely successful. We've been very happy to partner with NRCS and trying to foster different partnerships. We've had a kind of a gap in the past of really trying to connect with these private landowners. And so we've been able to connect with the conservation district, specifically on the western slope in Colorado, to really try to make more of an effort to piece together all these restoration sites that we've worked on. And then I'll just talk about the Tamarisk beetle a little bit. So we have a Tamarisk beetle monitoring program. So we collaborate with over 80 partners across the Southwest and to try to put together an annual distribution map. So what this map shows is the presence and absence of the Tamarisk beetle. And so our partners, we rely on them to go out in the field and to actually monitor for the beetle, and then they provide that data back to Ben, our Tamarisk beetle coordinator. He then puts all that information into a map, and what this helps practitioners on the ground and private landowners and land managers is with helping them to plan for the restoration work in the future. They can kind of see the movement of the beetle, where it's at currently, where it was historically, and anyone can monitor. We actually have a how-to video on our website, which I would encourage you all to check out. And if any of you are interested in participating in that, feel free to reach out to Ben. There's his email address on there, and we'd be happy to partner with you. And then going into the education piece of our work. So we have our Youth River Education Program. Kara oversees this. This picture on here is of her along the Colorado River teaching some youngsters about the Tamarisk beetle and our monitoring program. This is a new program she started last summer, and the kids loved it. They actually got to see the beetle. They were using some beetle nets to get the beetles out of the tamarisk trees and count them. And so that was a really big success. So this program is based in Mesa and Delta counties. We pretty much reach at least over 1,000 youth every year. And so this has been very successful that we are continuing to grow and foster. Riverside Stories, this is a media platform. I don't know, probably a lot of you have already seen some of these videos. We have a series of 4 different videos that showcase our some of our partnerships and different partners that we work with. This is a picture of Emily Cassian, who's the co-coordinator of the Desert or the Dolores River Restoration Partnership. And we use these videos to provide information on the work we do, to allow other NGOs or other partnerships to utilize these videos as well. We also have some short stories we have up on our website, so you can check those out. And then the other education event that we do every year is our annual Raft the River event. We've done this event for the past 6 years, where it's a fundraiser. We take 50 people down the river from Fruta down to Loma. We talk about the restoration work, and we actually allow people to see the work we're doing from the river, which is pretty impactful. And then we go back to Rimrock Adventures, the rafting company here in Fruta, and we have a dinner and music. And so our next event, hopefully, will go off without a hitch. That's going to be on August 22nd. If you are interested in signing up for that, you can head over to our website. On the lower left, there's a tab for upcoming events, and you can click on the Raft the River and sign up for that. And then lastly, technical assistance that we provide. So not only do our staff provide technical assistance on the ground, we also have a website where we have a resource center. There's lots of different things for people to look at, whether it's how-to videos, plant materials, how to monitor, different planning. We have various reports up there and featured articles. So that's something that we're continually growing, and is really a database of all things riparian restoration focused. And through all of that, so you have your collaboration, your education, technical assistance. Really, it's part of this inner working cycle, and that really makes this work happen. So work doesn't have to necessarily start at any point along this circle, but we have to fundraise, of course, for this type of work. It's can be very expensive, and it can take a long time to really make an impact over a number of years. You really have to be committed to this work, whether it's through leading and supporting invasive plant management. We promote research and native plant restoration, of course, the education, and then hopefully inspiring the next group of stewards to be hopefully our future land managers, various NGOs, what have you. We can come into this cycle at any time, depending on what our partners need and or want. And really, all of this is leading to long-term stewardship. As I said just a second ago, this work it's not easy. It can, it takes at least up to 5 years, not longer, to just really make an impact, to really get the invasive species removed and get native plants established. And so we couldn't do it without the work of all of our partners, of course, on all levels. And so that's just kind of a brief overview of our organization. I think we will open it up now for questions. And myself and Kara and Kristen and Rusty will bring up our videos for you so you can see our faces. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and we will try to do our best in answering them.
Yeah. I just wanted to add a couple things. I wanted to stress our relationships with our partners, the private landowners, state and federal agencies that are out there doing the work, that are on the ground stewards of the land. Our goal is to really work in conjunction with them to help inform decisions, present information that is state of the science and best practices, so their work can be more efficient and effective. And we are not landowners. We want to work with municipalities and different levels of government and private landowners to make that work better and more impactful. So I just want to stress how important our partners are for this work. So for those of you who are on the line, I want to thank you for that. And we do have a couple questions out there, so I'll go ahead and read them. The first one is there an estimate of the amount of water, acre feet, I think, of invasive species removed from the Colorado River system in total every year? Great question. That's a really difficult question to answer. There is some science out there on the water usage of these plants, and then the acreage of these plants. However, currently, our mapping estimates, we're trying to get a better and more accurate picture of what the footprint of these invasive plants are, like Russian olive and tamarisk in the Colorado River Basin. So to answer your question, I don't think we have a great sense on the amount of water. However, tamarisk and Russian olive are one of the top 3 most present plant species along the Colorado River. So if you think about that, you know, the usage of the water that could otherwise go to beneficial uses is fairly significant. It is our, I think it is our opinion that, you know, our water problems and solutions to the future in the Colorado River Basin are going to take a multitude of approaches. I think controlling invasive plants are one small piece of that we need to look at, but for the water problem and solutions in the Colorado River Basin, we're going to have to look at multiple solutions. So I hope I help you, give you a little bit more of an answer to you on that one. Let's see, I'm scrolling through. The next one is, what is your approach for restoring riparian areas when endangered species have come to rely on tamarisk and other invasive for nesting habitat? I can go ahead and give it a shot. I'll welcome any other staff to jump in as well. Yes, endangered species are a big concern, especially in the Colorado River Basin. In the lower basin, you know, species like the southwestern willow flycatcher. You know, we do not promote the wholesale removal and tearing out of all invasive plant species like tamarisk. We know that species have adapted to use those plants like tamarisk and the willow flycatcher, and so what we are really looking at is working with those partners in those areas to take a modeled approach where we can establish refugia in smaller patches and get native plants established in certain areas, and then move on to another area and remove invasives, you know, in another area. As well, we have worked with a lot of partners to establish buffer zones around known nesting areas, so those nesting areas will not be as impacted with restoration efforts. And so we've worked closely with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, local entities, agencies to be cognizant of the work and make sure that we are we're following the rules and laws and respecting you know, the recovery of certain species. So I hope that helps. It's a complex interaction with endangered species and restoration work. From our perspective as an organization, I think we're looking at the long view of it. We want to recover some of this habitat so some of those species can recover. And we know we got here with the encroachment of invasive species and a lot of other issues. So we do want to take a long view look at some of these recovery efforts. So the next one, does the beetle population maintain itself, or do they need to be reintroduced periodically? Great question. I don't know if Ben is on, but the beetle populations, when introduced to a new area, do take some time to establish or maintain themselves. So do sometimes need periodic reintroductions to create a establishment population, which means they can survive over a winter, they can breed, they can reproduce, and they can keep this cycle going. However, this is based heavily on the presence of the food. If they have defoliated an area and they don't have food, they will move from that area to where they will have more food. Now, a couple years later, the tamarisk might reestablish, since there's some vegetation that will reemerge, and they can come back and swing through. So there's this ebb and flow of populations that move up and down our rivers. But I would say, yes, sometimes they do need to be reintroduced periodically. And sometimes that's at different latitudes from east to west and different longitudes from north to south, as this organism continues to establish and get adapted to being in a new place, right? So they will have to, we will have to help them along at times. Let me be clear, our organization does not release the tamarisk beetle. Our organization monitors it and informs managers, private landowners, and agencies on where it's moving, as Shannon and Kara presented on. We know that you know, that the rapid defoliation of vegetation can have impacts on avian species and reptiles and mammals, and so we know that there are impacts to the defoliation, both positive and negative. So it's our stance that we monitor it and inform people of where it is going and moving. So, are there any other questions? Staff, do you have anything else to add?
Unmuted.
It looks like there are a couple questions. One is relating from Sally Thorson about are we providing comments to Fish and Wildlife Service about critical habitat for western yellow-billed cuckoo?
Yes, so we have commented on several of the phases of the critical habitat of the southwestern rural flycatcher and the yellow-billed cuckoo over the last number of years from our perspective. I think that we do that based on as much up-to-date information as we have as an organization. So we try to do that. We do provide comments to some of those critical habitat plans. Shannon?
Rusty, the next question is, how did the Russian olive and tamarisk invade our rivers? And we have a few more after that, it looks like.
Okay, great question. So tamarisk and Russian olive were both brought here in the 1800s, primarily from a horticultural standpoint. You know, it was used from that perspective. It was used in the after the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. It was widely used in conservation efforts. So tamarisk was used in more of a conservation approach to stabilize stream banks. And once our large dam projects came online in the Southwest, you know, the hydrology of our rivers got altered, and the spread of these invasive species kind of has happened. It was promoted by federal agencies, state agencies for quite a number of decades. Russian olive was used widely for conservation efforts, windrows, in agricultural and private lands context, as well as ornamental and trees within cities. And so the use of these two plants, there's a whole host of others, Siberian and Chinese elm, tree of heaven. You know, we could go on and on about the number of invasive species, but those were brought here in the early 1800s for ornamental uses, but then later for conservation efforts. And today, Tamarisk is on most noxious weed species, state listed noxious weed species. Russian olive is becoming more widely seen on invasive species lists in states, but it is still used in some Western states for conservation purposes.
So we have a few other questions that we can respond to directly with you if you'd like. So we are at 11:45. Be cognizant of everyone's time. Rusty, do you have anything else to add? I think we have a few other questions here that will probably take a little bit of time.
Okay.
But we can follow up.
Well, we'll follow up with questions. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you walked away with some information, a little bit more about what we do, how we do it, and how important our partners are in the work that we do. So again, I hope you all are staying safe and that we get out of the house here soon. So take care, and we'll talk to you soon.